thanks to WTA and to the Georgetown Center for having us along. When we got the call inviting us, they said if you could cover, smart cities, the evolution, what are the technologies required, the policy implications, and why Europe is ahead of the U.S. And you've got about 20 minutes to nail it. We said no problem. So I won't be able to answer all of those questions in the next 20 minutes, but hopefully it'll share a little bit of a perspective and maybe get everybody's juices flowing a little bit as we get into the panels, into the discussion. Of course, I didn't do the one thing that you should always do before this, which is to know which is the one that advances the slides. Hey, there we go. There's a number of the folks coming up on the panels. You'll recognize their company names. You may or may not know Silver Spring Networks. Silver Spring Networks is an IoT company that focuses on critical infrastructure. When the term IoT started to come into the lexicon about a decade ago, we looked at it and said, well, we want to be the company that does the Internet of important things. And our idea was that a big part of the application space that would come under IoT would be in energy, cities, roads, bridges, all sorts of infrastructure things that really affect how our lives run on a daily basis. And we're fortunate, if you follow these things, that Gartner just named us one of the visionaries in machine-to-machine IoT space. So the first question that was asked is, hey, could I step up and define what a smart city is? And the short answer is I can't, even though it's what I spend 20 hours a day doing. And the reason that I can't is that it isn't a thing. It's not a place, it's not a destination. It by definition doesn't have a definition. It is an evolution or a process that we're going through. And as you can see, I swiped this graphic from Digital Green. There's a lot of great graphics out there. This one misses a few of the things that I think a lot of people would even include in their definition of smart city around smart citizenry and e-government. Don't really get enough play here relative to what's out there. The general notion around smart cities from our perspective is how do you take everything that we do today and all the things that we'd like to do in the future and merge the physical world with the digital world. So I usually try to throw out a thought starter, and I think it's appropriate as we're talking about 5G and other technologies that are coming along and really playing off a comment that Peter just made, which is we go to cities, and I'll share some of the specific examples in a few minutes, and we ask them, what would you do if you could connect everything ubiquitously, securely, reliably, and it costs next to nothing? If you take away the financial constraint, because most people will start with, well, I don't have any money, so I can't do anything. Well, put that to the side for the moment and start with the idea that you can connect anything and everything and bring that physical world into the digital realm where it's available at the tip of your fingers 24/7, 365. And people then usually start to go, well, now that I think about it, there's a whole range of things that we don't do today, or we do manually today, or we just kind of are used to the inefficient and often random ways that it works, that I would change how I go. So the underlying dynamics, when we were talking about this having a coffee, the two underlying dynamics around smart cities that I think you have to appreciate are two very well-known technology laws. I live in the Silicon Valley. The first, of course, everybody knows is Moore's Law. So all the Intel people in the room say, yay. The cost of processing and computing, of course, keeps falling. We can do things even within the relatively short 15-year life of our company. The amount of processing, the amount of memory, the amount of capability that we can now embed in devices at a lower and lower cost has really been phenomenal. The other law, though, poor Dr. Metcalf never gets as much attention, but Metcalf's law is at least as important and maybe more so. So everybody probably knows Metcalf's law or knows at least of the concept of the network effect. And I would argue that for the purposes of smart cities and IoT more broadly, Metcalf's law needs a little bit of an addendum. It's not just the square of the number of things connected to the network, but it's also the diversity of those devices. Because the curious thing that's happening as you look at, and again, I'll share some examples, but the curious thing that's happening in the world of smart cities is cross-domain pollination. So in the traditional world of cities today, the people who run the roads and transport probably don't know the people who run energy or facilities, or maybe they know them, but they never work together. And one of the hallmarks of smart city applications has been this, this convergence or blending on the Venn diagram of where things that were energy become transport, transport becomes energy. Electric vehicles are the most obvious place where that hits, but there are many more. So thinking about smart cities and what are the challenges, as we go off and talk to the mayors and the city managers and the other people serving this. And it'd be great if there was one problem to solve. We could all just go focus on solving the one problem and then life would be good, right? But there's not one problem. You have population growth and move back to urban centers. Sustainability is becoming an absolute watchword for every major city, more so overseas probably even than in the US. We have major cities like London and Paris that made commitments at COP back last December to make specific environmental targets for their cities. Everybody's got budget pressure. I have yet to go to a city that says, I've just got too much extra money, please help me spend it. And then this last piece that I want to call out in the bottom, you might be the least intuitive thing on the slide. And what that is really trying to refer to is that cities and smart city development are not happening in a vacuum, right? It isn't this isolated thing that only is thought of in the context of people who come to smart city conferences. The citizenry has a different expectation of how they interact with the world. And that's driven by people like Uber and Airbnb. If you live in a world where you expect to be able to reach into your pocket, grab your phone, push a button, and a car just magically appears, then how do you think about getting license plates for your car? Well, you go to the DMV and you stand in line for 4 hours, and then you hope that you brought the right paperwork, and if not, they'll send you to the back of the line. And so people's expectations for how they interact with businesses and with their government are changing at the same time that this discussion is going on, nothing to do with what cities are themselves doing, but with how they interact with the world around them in different ways. So there are a lot of operational challenges, and hopefully we'll get, the technology panel can start to get into some of this. But this is not an easy technical problem to go solve. You have a variety. I put long-lived assets up, but the more accurate statement would probably be that if you look across the range of applications and things that people are doing in smart cities, they have a wide range of expected lifetimes. So things that I'm interacting with on my mobile phone, I'm perfectly happy. If I get 3 years out of a phone, I feel like I win, right? If you're talking to the city manager who's trying to implement a smart energy or smart lighting project, the expectation is that that asset will live in the field for 15 to 20 years. So as we talk about 5G, I would ask everyone to think back over the last 15 years, what was the technology that we deployed in the cellular networks 15 years ago? 5 years ago. Did 3G happen? Let's talk, we're talking 5G here. I'd like to get 6G on the table. By the way, I have no idea what 6G is. Other people in the room probably do. But during the life of this asset, of the deployment of smart cities, some of these technologies are going to be deployed today are going to have to be in the field in 15 years. And they're going to have to work with the technologies that are deployed in 14 years. And so how does that work? Security has always been a top-of-mind thing for cities and infrastructure providers, more so today than ever before. We had a little bit of a conversation at dinner last night about it. If you look at the DDoS attack that happened, that was inconvenient because you couldn't log into Facebook for 5 minutes. A DDoS attack on a smart city shuts down energy and traffic, and people probably die. So the security expectation around the implementation of smart city is, I think, a lot higher. I didn't put privacy up, but that's its parallel path. They're different things, to be sure. But if you don't have security, you can't have privacy, right? Because then you don't control it. Extensibility is one of the other great challenges. If anybody thinks that you can go down to the smart city store and buy a smart city, you're wrong. And as has been the comment that's already been made this morning, is these are things that are going to evolve over time. You're going to do the first thing, which is going to make you think about doing the second thing, which leads to the third thing. And so how do you create platforms and solutions that allow you to extend across an evolutionary implementation approach? You cannot sit down and design a smart city. I would argue that's an impossible task. Because you could define it, you could put all the smart people in a room and come up with a proposal, and it will be wrong tomorrow. It was right today, but it'll be wrong tomorrow, because somebody will invent a new thing or something will come along. So you have to take a systems engineering approach that accounts for that evolution and extensibility. And then finally, reliability. It's a different bar. We were having a conversation again last night about quality of service, a hot topic for all people in the world of networking. What's the quality of service when you're running infrastructure? We do part of the Smart Nation project for infrastructure in Singapore, and they have a great slogan there that the reliability expectation of the energy system in Singapore is 0.0009 failure. And so their slogan is that the average Singaporean will not experience a power outage in their lifetime. And so they come to people like us and they say, give us the system, the network and control system that makes it better. Thank you. So this is a complicated thing, as my good friend and co-founder Raj Vaswani likes to say, there's no silver bullet, it's silver buckshot. You have to do a lot of things right to pull this off. Now, quickly to touch on the technology side, and this is where the notion of this just being 5G, and I asked the organizers when we started, I said, do I only have to talk about 5G? That'll be a little limiting. No, it's the age of 5G, and I think that's the right way to think about it. So if you look at IoT as a networking space, there are many subcategories of activities happening in IoT. I love Bluetooth. I use Bluetooth every day. I would never build a network for smart cities on Bluetooth, right? It's great for my earpiece and it's great to sync my car to my phone, but it's not really the right technology. You're hearing these days a lot about technologies like Sigfox and LoRa that are coming in, and of course Zigbee and Wi-Fi and Ingenu and all these other things that have come along, and people might say, well, where does that all fit? And so I'm not going to propose the answer. I have a point of view. But I would argue that you really have to understand the space that you're competing in, and then create an architecture that acknowledges that all of these things are out there and that they're going to all have to be accommodated in probably a mix and match application. So we do fiber, wireline, cellular, Wi-Fi, and we use a lot of a technology called YSUN, which if you haven't followed it is the 802.15.4G, or the SUN is Smart Utility Networking, which is a wireless mesh unlicensed that complements licensed spectrum quite a bit. So I won't be able to solve all of this here, but but recognize that all of these domains are kind of crossing over each other. So on to a couple of the projects that we've done, and I'm going to highlight a few of the smart city projects that we've done, and there are some in the US, but a lot overseas, to really get to the question of what are people actually doing? And what we see people doing quite a bit of is infrastructure, energy, lighting, and starting around consumer engagement and citizenry information sharing. And so I'll highlight a couple of the projects. The ones that I really like are Copenhagen. Copenhagen is, you probably know, is the happiest city on earth. I don't think that's strictly because of our smart city project there, but it certainly helps. What the city of Copenhagen's done is they've put out a network canopy and an infrastructure that can connect any wide range of IoT devices. And they started with smart lighting, and you'll see smart lighting as a theme. Why is smart lighting becoming one of the early adopting applications within smart city? The answer is pretty obvious. To put it in economic terms, so to give my fodder to the business panel for later, the city lighting director, after the project was started, we said, well, how did you sell it to your boss? And he said it was very hard. I had to go in and say, you know how our annual budget for the infrastructure in Copenhagen is €4 million a year. And the boss says, yeah, thinking, oh God, here it comes, he needs 5. And he says, I really need it to be 2. I said, what do you mean? He said, I can cut our budget in half, put in better quality lighting, network all of that lighting, have it be smart and adaptive lighting, so that if you're riding your bike in the middle of the night down a bike path in Copenhagen, just like in a smart building like this one, the lights will brighten to guide the path. In places like Paris, in London now, there's quite a bit of activity around what's called dark sky initiatives. How do you dim the lights? So have the lights be bright until about 11:30 or 12, dim the lights until 5, brighten them again slightly, as you know, the darkest is right before the dawn. That actually turns out to be true. It's not just poetry. And so you can meet environmental goals for dark skies initiatives and cut your energy bill by something in the neighborhood of 65%, and that pays for itself almost instantly. Once you do that, as they've done in Copenhagen, now they're adding environmental sensors. We've taken over the control of the traffic in the city of Paris, who's then adding environmental sensors, because it turns out that you can use CO/NO monitoring as an indicator of where traffic flow patterns are, and get the audit trail you need to show your compliance with your COP21 commitment. What's the business case for the environmental monitoring? I haven't the foggiest idea, right? We've tried and tried and tried and tried to put math to that. We can't. But if you combine it with the smart lighting and traffic control thing, then it's free, right? Because it can all be deployed as a part of the cost structure paid for by the energy savings. So what are the things you're going to connect? This is my guess today. Again, I'll be the first to admit I'll be wrong tomorrow. Somebody will invent a new thing that I haven't thought of. But to put some perspective on it, we've tried to spend time with some of our clients and say, well, if you've got 1 million homes in your town, how many things do you think you will connect? What's the scope of the problem? And I don't know the answer yet. It'll probably evolve, but pretty quickly you can get to somewhere between 8 and 10 devices and the infrastructure alone that you'll want to connect for every home or business that you have. So if you're a town of 10 million people, 10 million homes like Metro New York would be, the implication might be upwards to 100 million connected devices. That's a lot of devices. And that doesn't count the people. That's not counting people with cell phones in their pockets or connected cars. That's just in infrastructure. So what's the dynamic? Each of these devices are becoming smarter. The intelligence is getting pushed to the edge, but they all have to kind of talk to each other. And so hopefully that'll get touched on during the course of the conversation today, because one of the big architectural questions that comes up for smart cities is, will this all be kind of command and control? Will cities be building these giant control centers that will monitor everything that happens in the city from one place? And the answer is most cities are building control centers, but much of the intelligence is being pushed to the edge. And so you're having this kind of cats and dogs living together thing that happens where the LEDs are talking to the sensors that are talking to the security cameras all out in the field. And the only thing that's getting transmitted back is the answer. I'll stop doing that at some point. So last couple of things to wrap it up. How can a US city, how can any global city really become smart? Well, the first is you do need to create a vision. Just doing a single app and declaring that you're smart is probably good for a headline and maybe good during the election season, doesn't really solve the problem. You have to lay out a vision of what you're going to try to do over, I would argue, a 10-year is a digestible time frame period of time. And you have to recognize that these things are going to evolve so that you have to build an architecture and a plan that's going to evolve. We suggest that you prioritize infrastructure modernization. Why? The payback is better and more definable. It's something that can happen within the realm of the city budget today, whether that's through energy savings or deferred maintenance. We have an aging infrastructure problem in most big American cities. The price tags that get put to those things are very large. If you can defer only a little bit of that maintenance and upgrade through the use of smart, the payback is quite good. And what that can do, if you've done the first thing right, is put dollars out there that will lower the cost of implementing some of the cooler or more experimental things. Infrastructure doesn't usually rank on people's list of sexiest things to go do, but it can improve people's lives almost immediately. And then you focus on those initial applications that you can then grow over time. I know there are policy people in the room, and so people will often say, well, what should the policy be? What should we in government be doing? In government here, I recognize being in DC, this could be federal government, could be what people's heads immediately go to, but I think it's federal, it's a state, and it's a local policy thing to do. So the first is you have to recognize that you're driving here to enable innovation. So if it's a different thing for different people, but that's a regulatory thing. If you're the FCC, it's spectrum availability, right? If every 5 years or so, I hear somebody bring up the conversation of clawing back some of the unlicensed, readily available free spectrum available in the US. That would be very bad from an innovation perspective. If we don't allocate and make the spectrum available for even the licensed spectrum auctions that are doing, then that will be bad for innovation. Privacy rules can have a big impact on innovation. And the specific thing for smart city people we were talking about with some folks is, if I make a personal decision to click through without reading all of the disclaimers that say that Google or Microsoft can go monetize my personal information, that's on me, right? Maybe I'm a dumb guy and I click through because I really like free Google Maps. If the city does that to me, right, that's a different dynamic. If the city puts something out that tracks my movements or behaviors and then makes that data available or tries to monetize that data, that's got a different policy implication. So we have to balance innovation and citizen rights. You see people like Bristol and Paris, interestingly enough, creating giant data lakes, and they're taking all of their data from their smart cities and they're pushing it into a publicly available, freely accessible data lake. Why are they doing that? A couple of reasons, but not the least of which is that no company along the way gets to monetize the raw data. and it spurs innovation. I believe that as we're thinking about legislation, we should legislate, what we want, not how to do it. No offense to anybody that works for government here, you're really bad at technology, by and large. So if you try to define the solution, if somebody came out and said, well, we have to do smart cities on 5G, just to pick the topic of the day, I think that would be a mistake. Just as much as making it would be a mistake to say it has to happen on unlicensed spectrum, or that it has to happen only wirelessly or wireline, or you'll get it wrong, and whatever the right answer was today, it'll be different again tomorrow anyway. So from a legislative perspective, I always go back to the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act, right? Didn't set high bars, raise the bar over time. None of the technology was available at the time the rules were passed to go achieve those goals cost effectively, and yet miraculously, by creating regulatory clarity on what the goal was, people innovated and the technology appeared. I do think that there's a lot of value in seeding the effort, and by seeding, that's the nice word of saying put money to it. The federal government's done some work, putting some grant money out. Columbus, Ohio is a project that we're involved in that received a federal grant. In infrastructure projects, there's a great example from the ARRA funding that happened when Obama first came to office around smart energy, that the return was something like a 10x investment for every dollar that was spent. So a little bit of seed money goes a long way, because people will say, well, just free money, I gotta go do it to get the free money. But it's not enough free money to pay for everything, so you get co-investment on a localized basis. And then the last piece is share. I got asked, what does that mean? Did you miss the rest of the sentence didn't get typed in? I think one of the real values that government can bring, policy can bring to this is sharing best practice and sharing ideas, creating forums where people are sharing best practices, sharing what works, getting stakeholders kind of married up together, because we are breaking down walls or traditional silos. And so government does have a kind of a bully pulpit here to go put out that I think can be very, very valuable in the development of smart cities. Cities, governments, utilities don't tend to want to be leaders. Everybody says they do. But the leader is the guy with the arrows in his back face down in the mud. Don't be a pioneer. I think, and I understand that, right? If you were a mayor of a major city and you put a big program out and it failed, your re-election hopes just dimmed dramatically. And yet, as much as people maybe are afraid to be leaders, they're deathly afraid to be laggards. So creating a fast follower mentality where if Chicago does something, then boy, and New York hasn't done it yet, there is competition across geographies. This is ultimately about livability and economic development. And the extent to which we can share those best practices, I think will create a groundswell to further adoption in basically a one-upsmanship between cities. We don't here in the US have the project in Singapore I referenced. The great thing about Singapore is it's a benevolent dictatorship, right? So people will just decide and then it happens. And we don't have that mechanism of government here, so we have to find a more, what I'll call a market-based approach. And the market-based approach is you don't want to look like a Luddite. So with that, I thank you for having me. We're on the yellow brick road. There is no Emerald City at the end, sorry. But I think we can see the destination. And so, the key is to get on the path and get walking. Thanks much. And I think I don't think we're going to do any questions here, but I'm going to be on the. If there are any, I'm certainly happy to try. It was either so befuddling that nobody can come up with a question, or.
The premise, I think, on your very first slide was marginal cost of zero? How central is that to all of this?
So,
you're looking at a huge investment base, and the marginal cost may be zero.
yeah.
Sorry, I've been asked to repeat the question. My apologies. How central to your thesis is that marginal cost of zero for the network?
Not at all. It's just really meant to be as a thought starter to get people imagining and get out of the loop of assuming that a budgetary constraint is gonna cut it. So networking doesn't have to cost zero. Devices don't have to cost zero. You do have to build a business case in most places that is economically viable and pays back, which is why the lighting and some of the energy examples I used have been important to launching these efforts, not because lighting's the most important or most exciting thing, it's clearly not, but it creates a pool of money because of the energy savings and the things you can get out of it. So one of the challenges you'll see as you get into smart citizenry activity is, as one example, is the benefits of the technology, the benefits of the initiative don't inure to the people who have to pay the bill, right? So there's this disconnect between who pays and who gets, right? And so that's a real challenge from a policy perspective, because I might say, we get together with the Center of Georgetown and we'd get a bunch of folks from the B school in and we'd write a great business case that says this thing pays out. You know, it's a 10-to-1 benefit cost ratio. Of course we have to go to it. But then when you peel it back and figure out who pays and who benefits, if those things aren't aligned, then that's a very difficult policy challenge to go through. If I had to pay $1 so that Larry gets $10 of benefit, I might go, Larry says it's great, let's do it. And I go, not so much.
What if I pay you $2?
If you kick back $2 of the 10, then we're talking, right? And so that's part of the math that goes on here is, you know, in the Copenhagen case that I mentioned, the city lighting guys got enough benefits that I could then pay for the environmental thing, and those guys had a great idea, but they didn't have any money. Working. Yeah.
Hi, John Mayo. You just, I thought, raised a really interesting hurdle about the disconnect between the payors and the beneficiaries. You also mentioned in the first part of your talk two things that are sort of dynamics that should be working very much, I think, in favor of moving forward, but which might ironically sort of be a hurdle. And I wanted to, since you're out there, I wanted to find out if they are real hurdles or just sort of imaginary ones. And that is that you mentioned that prices are going down over time and that technology is changing very rapidly. Does this, in any practical sense, do those things in any sense slow or cause pause to the deciders to adopt technologies today?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And the short answer is yes, I do think that gives people pause today, because because they're tied together. Even though if we've lowered the cost, right, then that helps because there's a lower hurdle to begin with. But if I'm convinced, and you know, I can tell you from the utility space, and some city spaces, then, and not to beat up on the carriers in the room, but you know, shutting down 2G, which from a technologist perspective is an entirely reasonable thing to do. It's like kind of time to move on, right? But people go, holy crap, and then I put in 3G, but now everybody's telling me 3G is already dead. And so it's 4G, but here we're having a conference on 5G, I'll just wait it out. And so there is tension and conflict between those things. The best answer, I think, is if we can lower the costs and accelerate or increase the benefits, then it lowers risk. Right? I haven't thought of that formulaically, but if you said the formula is the lower the cost and the greater the near-term benefit, then I can put a very small risk premium on doing something. Because if I only get 3 years out of it, then who cares? I'm fine with that because it paid for itself. That just happens to be really, really, really hard to do in infrastructure because people are building things that they expect are going to last for a long time.
You talked a lot about integration and looking at data and the impact on consumers and the public. It seems like what's being left out of this conversation is health effects, people getting sick from wireless radiation. And it's a real issue. The U.S. National Toxicology Program study, it's a $25 million study, showed wireless radiation causing cancer and being neurotoxic. And our standards conspicuously are leaving out the issue of pulsation and frequency. And it's not about heating and power, and our safety standards only look at this. With so much focus on how to expand and integrate this technology, shouldn't we be looking really closely at how this is going to affect people biologically? And there's a real concern because we do know that 25 states, half of our states, have opt-outs for smart meters because thousands of people have documented that they're getting sick from wireless technology and wireless radiation. And we're talking to people up on the Hill even that are getting sick themselves with brain tumors, brain aneurysms at very young ages. And no one's talking about this, and this is kind of the elephant in the room. But as we talk about exposing our whole population, our children, our families, our friends, our colleagues, shouldn't we really be looking at this? And with this study coming out very conclusively that wireless radiation causes cancer and is neurotoxic, isn't it time that everybody start looking at this and we put the same kind of funding and attention that we do to all this expansion talk into looking at health effects? Because this is a serious issue, and this is the responsibility of the people in this room to look at this really closely and take leadership in terms of how it's going to affect people biologically. And we have thousands of studies showing it's neurotoxic, carcinogenic, genotoxic. And it's not just us talking about this. Other parts of the world where they're warning people, and we instead are maximizing people's exposure rather than minimizing them where they're trying to in other areas.
Okay, you done? So I think I'll try to peel the question out of that. As you just, I think, illuminated, I don't think there's any lack of people talking about the issues or spending money on the studies, as your own question highlighted. So I think it does get talked quite a bit about. I think that I've read a number of the National Institute of Health studies that have been published, not all of them by a long shot, I'm sure. I would say that your characterization of the results of those is at best misleading in terms of the impact, but I think it gets a lot of attention. And I, for one, am a huge supporter of opt-out programs. I think that those are absolutely right and fair things to do.
I think we should move on to our first panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eric.